Please welcome David Maloof.
Let's begin with a prayer that I like. Dear God, to you we pray for hope, faith, and love, knowing that nothing that is worth doing can be achieved in our lifetime. Therefore, we can only be saved by hope. Knowing that nothing which is true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history. Therefore, we can only be saved by faith. And knowing that nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we can only be saved by love. My name is David Maloof. I live in Darien since 1997. I've attended NCS over the years. And in many ways, my modest ministry, I've written a book and I speak from time to time. And by the way, I had this idea yesterday that popped in my head of Lou Gehrig, the last-minute substitute for Wally Pipp, goes on to play 2,130 games. So I like to give these talks. I don't charge. I pretty much give my books away. So if anybody here would like to ever have me speak, I'm looking for 2,130 gigs out of this. I know a lot of you guys have ministries. But really, my ministry, my modest ministry, is born of the new Canaan Society. Because like 15 years ago, when you guys were at St. Paul's, a friend of mine invited me there. I went there. The guy, I'm a Catholic, so it wasn't really my guys are waving for a fair catch, but there's no football. And it wasn't really my thing. So I'm leaving. I'm like, okay, this was different. The singing, all the men, but it's not my thing. And I'm leaving, and there's a brochure on the desk. So I look at who's coming, and I look, and it's this guy, Bob Musikowski. And I thought, Bob Musikowski, I know him. Because when I was in college, we were both at Columbia. Bob ran the pub. And it's in my book. It's actually the introduction to my book. I got in a fight. I got in a bar fight. And I was about to get killed by a 6'5", 300-pound guy who played tackle for the football team. Or maybe he was only 230, but it looked like 300 to me. And we were dumping beer on each other. I was about to get killed. And right at that moment that I was going to get killed, Bob Musikowski jumped over the bar and saved my life. This is all true, dragged the guy out, and it got a little gruesome after that. So I'm done, right? Like, it's not my fight anymore, right? I just went home. Later during the night, the guy, who was apparently a real troublemaker at the school, knocked on Bob's door at like 3 in the morning. Bob opens it in his underwear, and it's all in Bob's book too. And they get in a fight. They roll down the stairs. Bob bites his finger. And then they want to throw the guy out of the school for attacking, because Bob he was a dorm counselor, for attacking a university employee. And instead, Bob gave him a job in the pub. So it all began of this story. So I look and I go, wow, if Bob Musikowski's coming back into my life like 30 years later, I got to go hear him speak. So I went to hear him speak, and he gives his talk, and I'm waiting in line and to shake his hand. And he looks like 3 people into the line. He goes, I know you. I said, yeah, I know you from Columbia. I said, you saved my life. It was a pub fight and everything. You jumped over the bar. And he's selling his books, right? He goes, yeah, it's all in my book. So thank God he didn't use my name. But the whole bar fight was in his book, and it's in my book. So I'm born. So then I, got involved with NCS. So I'm born a bit of NCS, a child of NCS. So thanks for having me. So I've written a book. I'm an international lawyer. Then I looked for more things to do with my life after connecting with Bob. I wound up getting involved in international diplomatic affairs a little bit. I'm on the leadership council of a group called Churches for Middle East Peace. I met Cardinal Egan in the elevator one time, Cardinal Egan, formerly of New York. I said to him, I'm a Jet fan, and I'm trying to make peace in the Middle East. So my life is doomed to failure. He looks at me as the elevator doors are opening. This is a true story. It's a 30-second conversation. He says, my son, I don't think the Lord would mind if you picked up the Yankees. It's a true story. So, and then that's a whole story with the Middle East. I went back and forth. I met with the leadership in Palestine. I brought the president of the Palestinian Authority here, who gave a speech at Cooper Union, who pledged when they do have a country, that it would be one which would have religious freedom. and he made that pledge openly in English, and so that's still on the book, so to speak, if it ever happens. And so I did a lot with that, but obviously I didn't succeed. So I wrote this book called Christianity Matters: How Over 2 Millennia the Meek and the Merciful Revolutionized Civilization, and Why It Needs to Happen Again. And there's some there, so please take them. Normally I have a fancy easels and about 20 of those posters, but I'm going to give a little brief version of this today. But really, my book is not about the belief in God, right? My book is about the belief in the belief in God. So what's the difference? So I'm not there to say why I believe in God, although there's plenty in there. But do we believe that the belief in God is something that's valuable? And that's what my book is about. And it's really about gratitude, gratitude for what the belief in God, and even if it turns out to be wrong, right? What if we die and there is no God? I say it's still a tremendous benefit to society. It has been to me. Gratitude, is a very individual thing. It's not linear or symmetrical. One guy graduates from Yale and says, I never want to see that place again. Another guy donates his whole fortune. They could be brothers. How is it? How could it be so nonlinear, so non-symmetrical? Tell the story of a couple walking down the street. Walking on the beach. And a bottle pops up. The genie pops out. And he says to the couple, you get 3 wishes, but here's the deal. Number 1, I don't like when couples disagree, so you have to agree. Secondly, once you make your wish, once you agree, they will come true within 5 seconds. Couple's 65 years old, they've been married a long time, they're like, oh my God. Okay, we have to agree. What's the first wish? They said, money. We're so modest. Our life is so modest. We hardly have any savings. We'd like to have a ton of money. Boom, 5 seconds later, their bank account's overflowing. Turn to the wife, and the wife says, honey, I took care of you. I took care of the kids. I took care of my parents. I never traveled. I haven't seen the world. I haven't seen anything. I'd like to travel for a few months. Would that be okay? Maybe go with my sister? Yeah, sure. Boom. As soon as they've agreed, within 5 seconds, the helicopter's coming. The cruise ship's going to take her. She's going to see the whole world. And the husband says, well, I guess it's my turn. I don't know how to tell you this, but I've been thinking, and I really would like a wife who's 30 years younger than me. She says, no, no problem. Go ahead and give him that. She turns to the genie. She says, go ahead. Make him 95. So you see where if you don't have gratitude, it may not work out. So my book is about gratitude for Christianity. And why did I get involved with the book? Well, my daughter was at a prominent university, and she was given a book to read called The Better Angels of Our Nature. It's on the decline of violence. It's by Harvard professor Steven Pinker, who's an avowed atheist. And he states in his book, and has stated in online and so forth, that he found no historical evidence whatsoever that Christianity has helped in the decline of violence. He calls Christianity benevolent hypocrisy. And this is actually the leading textbook in the country for the history, the study of the change in society in terms of violence over the centuries. So, and then people would say to me, you're interested in religion? They said, well, religion's not the solution. Religion's the problem. I thought, really? Is that the whole analysis? So I had to look into it. Now, somebody said, well, why would a lawyer have a right to look into religion? And William Wilberforce once said, religion is everybody's business. So I did my research and took a couple of years. And my book is really, I admit, a highlight film. I don't, work on the Crusades and the Inquisition. I mean, I certainly mention them. But it's about where has Christianity got it right. So, you watch the ESPN highlights at the end of the day. Every dunk goes in, right? Every three-point shot goes in. My book is the highlight film of where we've gotten it right as Christians. And I was really profoundly moved, and I'll give you just a couple of highlights from the book. I mean, one of the things is the simple fact that 25% of all of the health care in the world today, is done by Christian groups. And in some African countries, it's over 50%. And so The basis, though, of what I found in my book is that Christianity is at its best and is most successful, and through some of these people, when the Beatitudes are followed. So we've got the Ten Commandments, right? And the Ten Commandments, which obviously are Old Testament, which are tremendous things. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal. But they're about external actions, how you do things externally. The Beatitudes are about internal transformation. So they are, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the pure in heart, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. They're about internal transformation. And what I found was that Christianity really succeeded when the Beatitudes were put forth most prominently. And what has Christianity done? How has it really changed the world? There's this Oxford professor, Larry Siedentop, who simply writes that Christianity invented the individual. Prior to Christianity, there was essentially a patriarchy, the absolute supremacy of the patriarch, the family, and the tribe. But post-Christianity, it's the individual, who is the unconditional love for the individual, which comes first. And I also explain in my book, or I argue in my book, that Jesus was an extraordinary feminist. And that once we need to put feminism forward with Christianity in order to fulfill his mission. When you talk about the stoning of the adulteress, and Jesus says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, people see it as a great act of mercy. I interpreted it as a great act of equality. In those days, in the Old Testament, in the Jewish tradition, a man could commit, quote-unquote, adultery, a Jewish man, with an unmarried woman. And that wasn't adultery. Adultery was only having sex with a married woman. So this woman who's about to be stoned for being an adulteress was really in an unfair, one-sided society. And Jesus said, all of you have had sex with unmarried women, right? Because that's what you do here, even though you're married, and no one could cast a stone. So what has Christianity really accomplished? And I go through my book with some of these people. I mean, before Christianity, there was no such thing as the hospital. People took care of their own. They took care of their family. They took care of their tribe. Nobody took in a stranger. So Christianity really invented the hospital. And I have here St. Fabiola, who created one of the first hospitals. Died in 399. Oh, sure. Yeah, I just have 4 of them. Today, right, the hospital is a secular institution as well as a Christian institution. There are 117,000 hospitals in the world. That's an invention of Christianity. Christianity invented the formal school with Charlemagne. But the next one that I really ask people to focus on, which is really lost, is that Christianity invented democracy. John Locke, who wrote the Second Treatise of Government, which is the foundation of democracy. And people say to me, well, the Greeks had democracy. The Greeks had a majority slave culture. The slaves didn't vote, right? So it was a true aristocracy, although the aristocracy could vote. But John Locke, his theories in the Second Treatise of Government really created democracy. And it was based on both the New and Old Testament. The Old Testament part being, he simply said from Genesis, man was created in God's image. That simple sentence is the foundation for democracy. That means you don't follow a king. You don't have dictators. You're created in God's image. We're equal with any leader. And that became the basis for democracy in the world. Luke Ferry, in A Brief History of Thought in 2011, wrote, Christianity was to introduce the notion that humanity was fundamentally identical, that men were equal in dignity, an unprecedented idea at the time, and one to which the world owes its entire democratic inheritance. Then one of the next people I'd like to highlight is William Wilberforce, who, who Eric Metaxas has written a book on. I'm sure you know of Eric, who used to be part of this group. I mean, people say, well, what did William Wilberforce do? What did Christianity ever do? William Wilberforce, you probably know, ended the slave trade. And he wrote a book called Real Christianity. And he went to the British Parliament, and day after day after day, he lobbied for the end of the slave trade. And they said to him, well, you know, it's important for the economy, and it's you know, blah, 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 and we can't do it. And he would speak about the conditions on the slave ships, how they were chained to each other, how the disease spread rampantly, how you know, the cruelty of the entire process. And he would say at the end of his talks, you may disagree with me, and you may believe in the slave trade, but you can never say again that you didn't know. And just on his deathbed, they passed the law to end the slave trade. And the last person I'll tell you about in this little highlight, I mean, my book has like 50 of these people, is Father Jerzy, I always probably say his name wrong, Popolusco. Now, what did Father Jerzy do? He died at 34 years old, very similar to the age of Jesus. He was a priest in Poland, and he refused to accept the communist rule and the decision that the church could not operate freely. And the Polish state, taking their cues from the Soviet Union, arrested him, took him aside, said, you know, you're the young priest, we understand you have these ideas, it's got to stop. And they didn't stop. And then they arrested him again. And they beat him. And he came back and he preached. And it didn't stop. Finally, they arrested him. He was missing for 10 days. And at his church, they had a vigil, round the clock, playing the rosary until Father Jerzy comes back. Well, he was found dead in a river. And the Polish authorities said, well, we're done with that pesky priest, right? Too bad. And we said, now we've scared the people. The Soviet rule here will go on forever. The church will collapse. So the people will be afraid to even come to his funeral because they know we mean business with guys like this. Well, they held his funeral, and 6 bishops attended. 1,000 priests attended his funeral. People came in. They started to fill the church. They filled the aisles. They filled the vestibule. They filled the steps. They filled the street. They filled the town. 250,000 people came to his funeral. And there's Jonathan Quiddy, in his book Man of the Century, The Life and Times of Pope John Paul II, talks about essentially that after Popolusco was killed, the Soviet Union in Poland, the Soviet, state there, or controlled state there, never had control of the people again. The people came out, solidarity became prominent, and the Soviet Union collapsed. And he played a significant role, this Catholic priest. So these are just some highlights of where if people say to you, religion, and it's really, the Christianity is all about the Inquisition and the Crusades and so forth. These are some of the people who, following the Beatitudes, truly, truly changed our world for the better. And I always like to say, what is the future of Christianity? The future of Christianity is actually in China. When the Christians came out of the woodwork in China to support the people after the Sichuan earthquake in 2008, Chinese began to convert to Christianity. There are now 60 million Christians in China. It's expected by the year 2025 to be the largest Christian country in the world. And it is persecuted, but that doesn't stop it. The sermonist M.S. Fox wrote in his book called The Sermon on the Mount, Jesus Christ is easily the most important figure who has ever appeared in the history of mankind. It makes no difference how you may regard him, whether you choose to call him God or man, and if man, whether you choose to consider him the world's greatest prophet and teacher, or merely a well-intentioned fanatic who came to grief and failure and ruin after a short and stormy public career. However you regard him, the fact will remain that the life and death of Jesus and the teachings attributed to him have influenced the course of history more than any other man who has ever lived. So where do we go from here? Christianity is declining. From 2007 to 2018, the percentage of religiously unaffiliated Americans has risen by 50%. Around the world, respect for individual human rights and democracy, which are the cornerstone of the Beatitudes, are clearly on the decline in places like China, where President Xi made himself a president for life, President Putin, who assassinates his adversaries, in Poland, and I would argue even in the leadership of the United States. Respect for human rights and true democracy is not being followed. If Christianity is to succeed, is to be reinvented, it has to be done through the Beatitudes. Dorothy Day once said, "The world will only be saved by beauty." The Beatitudes and following the Beatitudes are the greatest form of beauty. It's a bit like Orpheus, who saved the Argonauts during the quest for the Golden Fleece. To avoid the seductive voice of the sirens who were trying to lure his men to the dangerous shoals, Orpheus pulled out his lyre, and the only way to overcome the pull of the sirens was for him to play a more beautiful song. The Beatitudes are the beautiful song that we need to play. Thank you very much. Questions, comments?
Thanks, David. And David wanted to make sure we had enough time for questions, but you know, one of the things that struck me is you read the chapters in your book, the titles, and it's really beautiful. They're all expressed as gratitude for something that Christianity has left us, as well as tying it to a beatitude. I think even a way of making people think about some questions, would you just read the chapter titles to us? And I think it's
sure.
a wonderful moment of reflection as you read these chapter titles to be reminded of the things, and also as David has tied them to the Beatitudes themselves.
Well, chapter 1 is thank you for mandating the equality of dignity for children. Blessed are the merciful. I didn't even mention that, but pre-Christianity, infanticide was legal. I'm not talking abortion, I'm talking infanticide. So that a parent had the right, the legal right, and it was common practice to kill children you didn't want. You left them by the side of the river. And this was legal, normally practiced. When Christianity became the dominant culture, the Christians said, we don't do that anymore. We save our children. That's just one of those fundamental changes in the world which exists today. So chapter 2 is on the hospitals, blessed are the merciful, for the creation of education, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the creation of democracy, the same one. The Enlightenment, you know, Steven Pinker, the Harvard, has a book out called Enlightenment Now, how what he says, we have to do away with religion and through the Enlightenment, but there was a Christian enlightenment that he misses. So they go on like that.
Even read the thank yous. I think the thank yous are so powerful. Your actual wording of the thank yous.
Do we have time?
Yeah.
Okay. So I say, thank you for recommitting society to the care of the poor in the 19th and 20th centuries. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Thank you for promoting the concept of justice through the centuries. Blessed are the merciful. Thank you for reassessing, fighting for, and revolutionizing human rights, civil rights, and animal rights in the 18th through the 20th centuries. Blessed are the merciful. One of the things about Wilberforce, not only did he end the slave trade, he also created the ASPCA. How's that for one guy doing two things? He also ended cruelty to animals, which was the Royal Society, but here it's the ASPCA. Thank you for freeing and recreating India, the world's second most populous country in the 20th century. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Thank you for preserving an underground movement for religious freedom in China, the world's most populous country. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Thank you for helping to defeat totalitarianism in communist Europe in the 20th century. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Thank you for promoting, through free enterprise, the moral economy in the 12th through 20th centuries. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Thank you for laying the groundwork to keep our planet safe from environmental harm. Blessed are the pure in heart. Thank you for giving us the gift of the gentle, grace-filled, selfless, and satisfying inner life. Blessed are the pure in heart. Thank you for a philosophy that inspires the highest levels of spiritual self-transcendence, marked by unconditional forgiveness. Blessed are the pure in heart. So, there you go.
So, Questions, guys? Questions about any of that for David, who has spent a lot of time thinking about these different things through history, and also where we're going and where we are.
John? Okay, sorry, you go first. You got the mic.
In a study of history, in a study of the commitment people gave of their lives, when I think about the here and the now, every Friday morning when we walk out of here, what's on my heart is, what are we going to do today? What are we going to do today? So when we as Christian warriors, when we walk out of here, David, if you would suggest one bit of advice, guys, fill in the blank. Guys, these are your examples through history. What are you going to do today to be in your own little world, that kind of leadership?
Well, you know, Pope Francis just coined a great phrase. He said, don't be afraid to be in the middle class of holiness. And so, you know, you have to think, you have to understand. There's a great song that's on Christian radio, right? Think Small, where he goes on and on about all the small things he does. So you can't all be Mother Teresa or you know, end communism or so forth, but each of us can do these, it sounds, you know, trite, but can change the world in our own ways. And it really does pass on to the next generation. And I think the most important thing is not to get discouraged and to think, well, I can't really change this or that in the world. But you can plant the seed for the next generations, for Christianity to grow. And, you know, I think you do that by finding someone who needs help and read one of the Beatitudes and follow it. And we can do that either through churches in group settings or individually. I think it's that simple. And you know, it has to be a process, as it's always been, where those small acts, you know, Robert Kennedy in his great speech in South Africa said, from each of our acts of courage are ripples of hope. And those ripples eventually come together to create a mighty current. And you have to understand that when you do some good act and your children see it and your neighbors see it, it's a ripple of hope that they will ultimately follow. That's the belief. JFK has a great story he used to tell when he was trying to, he wanted to get us to the moon, and people were saying that's so far in the future. And he told the story of the French general who, in the middle of World War II, said, well, we don't have any trees around this, you know, plant some oak trees. And the gardeners came in the next day. Said, did you plant the oak trees? They said, no, not yet. So the next day, he called the gardener, did you plant the oak trees? They said, no, not yet. Called him the next day, no, not yet. We didn't get to it. He said, General, what's the big deal? It's 20 years before an oak tree gives you an acorn. It's 70 years before it's grown, and its lifespan is 700 years. What is the rush? He said, 700 years? In that case, I'm ordering you, plant it today. That's what we have to believe in. It doesn't, the acorns will be planted, and they may, you know, you may not, sorry, the trees will be planted, and we may not see the acorns, but that's okay.
I loved your Doris, here, John, but I loved your Doris Day quote about beauty being the only thing that can overcome, as I think that we actually have the power in every single human interaction. We either make the world a little more beautiful and bring it a little closer to God's intended creation, or we move it backwards.
Absolutely.
Every store clerk, every person we speak to, we are either adding to the beauty of the world or making it a little bit uglier.
Dave, there were some other institutions, too, that were created by Christians. And in particular, I was impressed in your book to see that really universities and also the Red Cross. Maybe you could just talk briefly about a couple of those. That I know you were talking about highlights, but these, I think, for me, were highlights, too.
Sure, John. I mean, well, it's been lost, right? But Christians created the whole concept of the university. You know, when people want to talk about the Inquisition and the Crusades, like, that gets lost in the shuffle. But really, the whole concept of a formal education, of the giving of information, of education in a formalized setting, is a Christian concept. And Charlemagne ordered the creation of these schools. The Red Cross, so Charles Dunant was sort of a wealthy guy, but he needed money. He was going to see Napoleon, not the Napoleon we know, but Napoleon II, I think. And he had to walk through this battlefield. And in those days, when you had a war, you injured somebody, you left them there. You didn't pick them up. You didn't heal their wounds. So he's walking through this battlefield, and he was astounded. There were 30,000 people injured, just moaning, groaning, bleeding. There was no Red Cross. There was nobody who went back to help them. So he went to a church. He gathered up a bunch of ladies in the town. He set up an immediate hospital, and he wrote a book called A Memory of Solferino, and he created the Red Cross. And he was a devout Christian. So you see how one episode, he never did save his business. He never did, even get to see Napoleon II. He stopped right there and completely changed his life. And he also, ironically enough, like Wilberforce, who did two amazing things, he essentially created the International YMCA. So when you go to the YMCA here, now they call it the Y, right? But it's the same guy. Created the Red Cross, created the Geneva Conventions. He won the first Nobel Peace Prize, and created the YMCA. All out of that one experience and writing that one book. So there's so many Christian inventions which we totally take for granted. Sir?
Hey, really enjoyed the talk, and I look forward to reading your book. So I had two questions for you, if I can. The
Sure.
first question is, have you had the chance to interact with Steven Pinker at all, or if he's read your book? And the second question is, what would you say to people who would say, William Wilberforce is great, but Christians created slavery, and they brought it to the Western Hemisphere, and they can point to verses in the Bible that talk about, here's what you do when you have slaves, and here are the circumstances under which you do take slaves. What would you say in response to those kinds of questions?
Okay, so first, Steven Pinker, I did, and by the way, if we run out of books, they are on Amazon for a pretty modest price. I wrote to Steven Pinker, and I challenged him to a debate. I never heard back. He knows about my book if he read my letter, but other than that, but his book, Enlightenment Now, he really takes off the gloves and attacks Christianity in an entire chapter. His view is religion is the problem. So I would love to debate him. Factually, he's just so wrong. He just completely he says Christianity preaches the afterlife, so it makes you be bad in your human life, because all they care about is the afterlife. I mean, he has no knowledge at all of the religion or really acceptance of the true history. With respect to slavery, it's true, there's a lot of things in the Old Testament, right? There's genocide in the Old Testament. There's an order to wipe out an entire people, including their memory. I'm a big believer in the primacy of the New Testament. And in the New Testament, these Beatitudes guide us. And everything is in historical context, right? It's an evolution. So I would say, yes, Christians participated in slavery. Yes, they justified it using the Bible. But we outgrew that over time, and we led the way to end the slave trade and the civil rights movement, and so many ways of improving human rights and humanity. When I give my talk, I often say, people say Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement. I say, that's wrong, completely wrong. The Reverend Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference led the civil rights movement. Christians banded together to lead the civil rights movement, with help from others, but it was a religious-based movement. So we've evolved. Martin.
To younger folks in your message.
Yeah, I spoke at Bob's school, Bob Mozikowski's school, Chicago Hope Academy, and I speak at all kinds of high schools. I'm speaking at Kellenberg on Long Island soon. Bob complained. He goes, "You got all these women in your book and stuff that we don't teach." So the kids got on his case, like, "Who are these people? We've never learned about them." Because my book is very focused on the feminism of Christianity. I think the Catholic Church needs to have female priests. I think we need to have an equality between the sexes. And that's the primacy of Christianity. That's Jesus' message. When he's at the well, and he's giving living water to the Samaritan woman. He's not only talking to a Samaritan, he's talking to an unmarried woman. He's telling us, equality is my message. And the students love that. So maybe we need to evolve in that area.
I think we have time for one more.
David, thank you for your talk. My interest and concern is that many of these institutions today, which do have these marvelous Christian roots, are now been taken over by a progressive, godless type of theory, which is leading to the political divides we see in front of us, the deep state that's going on in Washington, and those mountains. We had Lance Wallnow do the 7 mountain theory come here. Those mountains which we Christians are supposed to capture and take, we don't because of our 501c, or because take the immigration problem we have. The Baptists and the Roman Catholics are making billions of dollars over this illegal immigration that's coming in. How do we recapture the true theories and the true purposes of the Christian message in these institutions?
Well, the truth is, yeah, we don't have a political party, right? We don't have a party which champions the Beatitudes and champions faith, right? We've got these snippets of parties we can choose from. My own view, and we probably might politically disagree on this, is that if it's the state that's promoting health care, that's promoting Christian principles, that's okay. We can join in that. But we want to keep within it the Christian morality message. And where that gets lost, we need to bring it back. So it's difficult because we don't have the leadership that combines these two things. The beatitudinal love and the Christian message. And so I think we need to get the Christian message back. Not saying everybody needs to be a Christian, but that these Christian principles have made the world a better place, and let's not write it off in the name of just, doing good for the poor and so forth. But there's no leadership there, I agree. Thanks so much.